When we hear the term serial killer, we often imagine a sinister stranger or a hardened criminal. The following 4 cases, however, defy those stereotypes. These real-life serial killers, a grandmother, a former pro wrestler, a child, and a crime reporter, were extremely unlikely suspects, yet each committed shocking crimes. Welcome to Bad Things. Let's delve into their seemingly ordinary lives, the gruesome deeds they hid, how they were finally caught, and other newsworthy details of their cases. Tamara Samsonova, the Granny Ripper of St. Petersburg. At first glance, Tamara Samsonova appeared to be a kindly Russian pensioner. Born in 1947, she had worked for years at a luxury hotel and lived a quiet life in a St. Petersburg apartment. But behind this grandmotherly facade lurked a macabre secret. In July 2015, the 68-year-old Samsonova was arrested on suspicion of murdering a 79-year-old woman in her care, then dismembering the body and dumping the parts by a nearby pond. Shockingly, once in custody, Samsonova confessed that this was only the latest in a string of killings over nearly 2 decades. Samsonova's crimes were gruesome and calculated. Investigators found CCTV footage showing her hauling plastic bags believed to contain body parts of her final victim, Valentina Ulanova. Investigators say Samsonova laced Ulanova's food with sleeping pills, waited for her to fall unconscious, and then killed and dismembered her with a hacksaw. This brutality earned Samsonova lurid nicknames in the press like the Granny Ripper, and even comparisons to the child-eating witch of folklore, Baba Yaga. When police searched her apartment, they uncovered a disturbing diary. In it, Samsonova coolly recorded details of various murders. Writing, for example, how she killed my tenant Volodya, cut him to pieces in the bathroom with a knife, put the pieces of his body in plastic bags, and threw them away around the city. Some entries hinted at cannibalism. She described removing certain organs and admitted to eating body parts like lungs. A police source told reporters that the possibility Samsonova ate her victims is not excluded. Authorities suspect Samsonova may have killed up to 14 people over 20 years. Among the suspected victims were her husband, Alexei, who vanished in 2000, never to be found, and a former lodger from 2003. For years, dismembered bodies had been discovered around St. Petersburg, and now police were comparing Samsonova's diary entries to unsolved cases of body parts found in bags across the city. Though she was definitively charged with 2 murders, Samsonova's own writings implicate her in many more. Her seemingly ordinary life made these revelations all the more chilling. Neighbors had known her as a polite, if eccentric retiree who tended a garden and fed stray cats. No one imagined this soft-spoken grandmother could be a serial killer. The capture of Tamara Samsonova gripped Russia in horrified fascination. In court, the grey-haired woman showed flashes of dramatic flair. At one hearing, she blew a kiss to journalists and declared, "I was getting ready for this court action for dozens of years. With this last murder, I closed the chapter." Investigators ordered a psychiatric evaluation, noting Samsonova had a history of mental health treatment and possible schizophrenia. Given the extreme nature of her crimes, it's unsurprising that she was ruled psychopathic by experts. Samsonova was deemed unfit for trial and sent to a secure psychiatric clinic for indefinite treatment, effectively a life sentence behind hospital bars. The tale of the Granny Ripper, a diminutive senior who allegedly butchered victims and even boiled their remains in a stock pot, is a nightmarish reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The very notion of a grandmotherly serial killer and cannibal made headlines worldwide, leaving an indelible mark on St. Petersburg's history of crime. Juana Barraza, Mexico's little old lady killer. Juana Barraza was an unlikely serial predator, not just for her gender, but for her public persona. A former professional wrestler in Mexico City, she was known in the ring as La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence. Outside of wrestling, Barraza was a middle-aged single mother who kept a low profile. Yet between the late 1990s and 2006, she led a double life as La Mata Viejitas, the infamous little old lady killer, preying on elderly women living alone. Her case shook Mexico as it shattered the stereotype that serial killers are nearly always men. By day, Barraza looked ordinary, stout with neatly cut short hair, often dressed in unremarkable street clothes. But she would spend hours in public markets or parks, scouting for potential victims, women in their 70s or 80s who lived solo and might welcome a helping hand. Barraza's modus operandi was chillingly cunning. She often gained the trust of her victims by posing as a city welfare worker or nurse offering free checkups, or simply by helping an old lady carry groceries home. Once inside their home, she would attack. Her preferred method was strangulation, using whatever was at hand. A pair of pantyhose, a telephone cord, or even the stethoscope prop she carried. Many victims were found with ligature marks, and crime scenes showed signs of a fierce struggle. Mexican authorities initially refused to believe that a woman could be responsible for these brutal murders. As dozens of elderly women turned up dead, profilers wrongly presumed the killer was a man, perhaps disguising himself in women's clothes. This misdirected profile allowed Barraza to evade detection for years. In reality, her motive was deeply personal. Profilers later concluded Barraza was releasing decades of pent-up rage at her own mother, an alcoholic who had cruelly given young Juana away to a man for sexual abuse in exchange for money. Barraza's hatred of her mother, who died years earlier, was tragically redirected toward vulnerable strangers who reminded her of that mother's age. The hunt for La Mata Viejitas intensified by 2005, becoming one of the largest manhunts in Mexico City's history. Police had over 100 investigators on the case, and even arrested several transvestite street vendors at one point, following the flawed theory that the killer might be a man in women's clothing. Fear gripped the capital's seniors. Some stopped opening their doors to anyone. Barraza was finally caught red-handed on January 25, 2006. An 82-year-old woman had been strangled in her home that day, and a tenant living on the property saw a victim in a nurse's uniform hurrying away. The tenant alerted police, who chased down Barraza nearby. She was arrested carrying a stethoscope, pension forms, and other items that linked her to the crime scene. Once in custody, Juana Barraza confessed, but only to the one murder for which she was caught. Investigators, however, connected the dots to a string of at least 16 murders of elderly women, and possibly as many as 40. In 2008, Barraza was convicted on 16 counts of murder and sentenced to a jaw-dropping 759 years in prison. In court, the 50-year-old showed little emotion as the verdict was read, merely imploring, "May God forgive you and not forget me," before vowing to appeal. The sensational case made headlines worldwide. A female serial killer is rare enough, but one who was a lucha libre wrestler and preyed on little old ladies was unprecedented in Mexico. It even inspired a Netflix documentary in 2023, reflecting the lasting intrigue around Barraza's crimes. Today, she remains behind bars at Santa Marta Acatitla prison. Her dark transformation, from a quiet working-class mother with a wrestling past to the most notorious serial killer in Mexican history, stands as a disturbing example of how an unlikely suspect can hide in plain sight. Mary Bell, the 11-year-old girl who killed. Perhaps the most shocking unlikely serial killer is one who wasn't even a teenager. In 1968, England was forced to confront the unthinkable. An 11-year-old girl had become a serial killer. Mary Flora Bell, a child from a troubled home in Newcastle, committed 2 murders just weeks apart, making her one of the youngest known killers in modern history. Mary's case defied all expectations of what a murderer looked like. At the time of her crimes, she was a slight, dark-haired girl with a soft Glasgow accent, often seen playing in the streets. But behind Mary's innocent appearance lay a violent and disturbed temperament, forged by years of abuse and neglect. Mary Bell's official life gave little hint of what was to come, though there were warning signs. She was raised in a chaotic environment. Her mother was a teenage sex worker who reportedly physically and sexually abused Mary in early childhood. By age 10, Mary exhibited frequent aggression and mood swings, attempting to choke other children during play. Neighbors and teachers had witnessed her cruelty to other kids and even small animals, but in the 1960s, the idea of a child serial killer was virtually unimaginable. Authorities largely dismissed these red flags. At one point, Mary was briefly interviewed for attacking children, but since she was so young, she got off with just a warning. No one intervened effectively before it was too late. On May 25, 1968, the day before Mary's 11th birthday, tragedy struck. 4-year-old Martin Brown was found dead in an abandoned house in Mary's neighborhood. Mary had lured the little boy by telling him he looked ill and that she could massage his throat to make him feel better. Then she strangled him with her small hands. The death was initially written off as an accident because there were no obvious injuries. Astonishingly, Mary returned with a friend to vandalize a nursery school in the area and left handwritten notes taking responsibility for Martin's death. One childishly scrawled message read, "We did murder Martin Brown. Fuck off, you bastard." But police dismissed these notes as a sick prank by juveniles. Mary's craving for attention was already on display, yet no one imagined the notes could be genuine confessions from a child murderer. Just weeks later, on July 31st, 1968, Mary Bell struck again. This time the victim was 3-year-old Brian Howe, a toddler from the same Scotswood neighborhood. Mary, along with her 13-year-old friend, Norma Bell, lured Brian to a nearby wasteland where he vanished. What happened next showed just how far Mary's violence had escalated. After Brian was killed, Mary returned to the scene alone. Investigators later revealed that she had tampered with the body in ways that were too gruesome to mention here, especially considering her age and the age of her tiny victim. Detectives would later say that what Mary did was carried out with an unsettling level of calm and purpose. As the neighborhood searched frantically for Brian, Mary inserted herself into the chaos. She even approached the boy's relatives and suggested, almost casually, that he might be playing dead somewhere, a remark that struck everyone as bizarre and unnerving. When Brian's body was discovered, the shock rippled through the community. Detectives immediately connected this case to the earlier death of 4-year-old Martin Brown. What had first seemed like a tragic accident now looked like the work of a killer, and the horrifying possibility emerged that the killer was a child. The investigation into Brian's murder quickly focused on Mary and Norma, as they were the last seen with the boy. Seasoned detectives struggled to believe girls so young could commit such brutality, but the evidence mounted. Mary began to leak strange clues. She mentioned to police a pair of broken scissors that might have been used, a detail of the crime scene that had been kept secret. She also displayed bizarre behavior at Brian Howe's funeral, laughing and rubbing her hands as if proud of her work. One detective later said of seeing Mary at the funeral, "She stood there laughing. I thought, my God, I've got to bring her in. She'll do another one." That same day, police arrested Mary Bell and her friend Norma. During questioning, the weaker-willed Norma broke down and implicated Mary as the aggressor, while Mary showed a mix of defiance and indifference. In one remark emblematic of her coldness, when charged with killing Brian Howe, 11-year-old Mary replied, That's all right by me. Mary Bell's trial at Newcastle Assizes in December 1968 was a media sensation. For the first time, the public saw the face of this child killer, since the judge waived the usual anonymity due to the extraordinary circumstances. Mary, just barely 11 and a half, sat quietly in the dock, sucking her thumb at times, as the court heard 2 weeks of grim testimony. In the end, the jury convicted Mary of manslaughter, not murder, on both counts, accepting that she had diminished responsibility due to her age and psychological state. Norma was acquitted of any murder involvement, essentially seen as a frightened follower. Mary Bell became Britain's youngest ever female killer, a record that still stands. The judge ordered that Mary be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, an indefinite sentence in a secure facility, given her youth. She served 12 years in custody, receiving therapy and education, and was released in 1980 at age 23. The Mary Bell case remains one of the most startling episodes in UK criminal history, raising debates about nature versus nurture, juvenile justice, and media ethics. Upon release, Mary was granted a new identity and a lifelong court order protecting her anonymity, often dubbed the Mary Bell Order, so she could restart her life. She later had a daughter and fought successfully to extend her anonymity to cover her child as well. Sporadic news stories have appeared over the years, such as outrage when Mary collaborated on a book about her life, or when tabloids attempted to expose her location. Yet, by all accounts, Mary Bell has lived quietly and legally since gaining freedom. Now in her 60s, she remains a fraught symbol, the little girl who killed in cold blood. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how evil can manifest, even in a child, and how society should balance punishment and rehabilitation for the youngest of killers. Vlado Taneski, the crime reporter who became the killer. In a twisted irony of fate, a man who built his career on reporting the news became the subject of headlines himself, as an accused serial killer. Vlado Taneski was a veteran journalist in a small town of Kochevo, North Macedonia. For over 20 years, he had been a quiet, diligent reporter covering local beats like municipal affairs and community events. Colleagues knew Taneski as a polite, exceptionally quiet man, a married father of 2 who never showed any signs of aggression. Yet in the mid-2000s, this unassuming journalist led a secret life far darker than any story he'd ever covered. Taneski was systematically kidnapping and murdering elderly women, and then writing about the very crimes he committed. The official story of Vlado Taneski's life gave no obvious warning. He was born in 1952 and had an ideal marriage, according to his wife of 31 years, who insisted she never saw any violence in him. However, there were hidden cracks. Taneski had a troubled relationship with his late mother, to whom he was reportedly very close, yet deeply resentful. His mother had worked as a cleaner, and after his father's suicide in 1990, their relationship deteriorated. In what now seems like a glaring clue, all of Taneski's known victims were poor, older women who worked as cleaners, women who actually knew his mother in real life. It's suspected that Taneski harbored a pathological hatred of his mother, which he projected onto these unfortunate women. Between 2005 and 2008, a series of gruesome murders rocked the town of Kochevo. 3 local women in their 50s and 60s went missing, only to be found later raped, tortured, and strangled with telephone cords. The killings were exceptionally brutal, and fear spread among Kochevo's residents. Vlado Taneski covered the developing story closely for national newspapers Nova Makedonija and Utrinski Vesnik, and his articles stood out for their vivid, authoritative detail. In fact, his reports contained details about the crime scenes that the police had never released to the public. At first, editors and readers alike were impressed by Taneski's journalistic thoroughness. But soon, investigators grew suspicious that the reporter knew too much. One report by Taneski mentioned the precise type of phone cord used to tie a victim, a fact known only to detectives at that point. He also consistently happened to be the first on the scene, calling in tips to his paper mere hours after each body was discovered. The police began to wonder, was their local newsman actually the killer? The breakthrough came in June 2008. Forensic tests had recovered DNA evidence from one victim, and it was a match to Vlado Taneski. Armed with this, authorities obtained search warrants for Taneski's home. What they found sealed the case. Hidden in his house and garden shed were objects belonging to the murdered women and neatly coiled bundles of telephone cord identical to the ligatures used in the killings. Taneski was arrested on June 22, 2008, and charged with 2 counts of murder. Investigators were preparing charges for the third and probing a possible 4th victim who had disappeared in 2003. The evidence was overwhelming, and under questioning, the 56-year-old journalist could not explain away the incriminating clues he had effectively provided himself. News of the arrest stunned those who knew Taneski. His fellow reporters and editors were incredulous that the mild-mannered colleague who helped cover school events and local politics was a suspected serial killer. "I could barely believe my ears," said one long-time co-worker when police informed him that your reporter is the murderer. The story made headlines worldwide as a real-life example of the criminal who embeds himself in an investigation. Some likened it to a dark crime novel come to life. The killer who writes about his own crimes, perhaps for the thrill or perhaps out of a subconscious desire to be caught. Indeed, a chief psychiatrist in Skopje theorized that Taneski wanted to be caught and was leaving hints in his articles as a form of confession. It's as if the boundary between Taneski's work and his deeds blurred. He turned his murders into news stories and watched the horror unfold from the front row. Before more could be uncovered about his motives, the case took one final dramatic turn. Just one day after his arrest, on June 23, 2008, Vlado Taneski was found dead in his prison cell under mysterious circumstances. Authorities ruled it as suicide, although some Macedonian media speculated about the possibility of foul play or an arranged act. A note was reportedly found in which Taneski denied responsibility for the murders, but few take that claim seriously given the weight of evidence against him. With his death, the criminal proceedings ended, but the impact of his crimes did not. The people of Kochevo were left with unsettling questions. How could a trusted journalist betray his community in such a heinous way? What hidden madness drove him to target women who resembled his mother? The Vlado Taneski case remains one of the most bizarre in recent memory. It highlighted both the cleverness and the hubris of an unlikely killer. On one hand, Taneski evaded suspicion for years by exploiting his role as a reporter, essentially investigating his own crimes and steering public perception. On the other hand, it was his very pride in that work, his flourish for including insider facts, that ultimately gave him away. Police spokesman Ivo Katevsky noted that in the end, many things pointed to him, and that without Taneski's detailed articles, the case might have taken much longer to solve. For Macedonia, it was the first known instance of a serial killer in the country's modern history, and the perpetrator was the last person anyone would have suspected. Even Taneski's wife, who thought she knew him best, was blindsided by the revelation. The legacy of this killer reporter is a cautionary tale in journalism ethics and criminal investigation. It ensures that whenever a crime reporter seems to know a little too much, investigators might cast a wary eye in that direction, just in case the storyteller has become the story. These 4 cases underscore a chilling truth. Evil can hide in the most unlikely of guises. A sweet old grandmother, a charismatic lady wrestler, a little girl at play, a respected newsman. None fit the typical image of a serial killer, yet all committed or were charged with serial murder. Their stories, spanning different countries and eras, from the 1960s to the 2010s, show that there is no single profile for what a killer looks like. Such cases continue to fascinate and disturb us because they defy our expectations of safety and trust. Whether it was a careless clue, a witness's alert eye, forensic science, or psychological profiling, truth found its way out. These unlikely serial killers remind us to expect the unexpected, and that sometimes the face of horror may be the one we'd least suspect.